Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another edition of Against the Odds. So last week, on our Against the Odds poll, it was Splendid Reclamation in Modern blowing the rest of the competition out of the water. So that means that this week, we get to head to Modern to play a deck I'm super excited about. So when Splendid Reclamation was spoiled, one of the very first Eldritch Moon decks I built, theoretically, like on paper for an article, was a Splendid Reclamation Valakut the Molten Pinnacle deck. And unfortunately, I haven't had a chance to actually test that deck out in practice, but now, since all of you voted for Splendid Reclamation, we get to play a version of the Valakut Splendid Reclamation combo in Modern, and I'm really excited because on paper, this deck looks like it could be legitimately powerful and legitimately good, but I really want to see how it plays in practice, in some actual games. So, a quick reminder before we break down Splendid Valakut. If you enjoy this deck, and you're enjoying Against the Odds as a whole, it would be awesome of you if you could take a quick second, click the like button, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment. All those things are great ways that you can support the channel and the site for free. So anyway, Splendid Valakut. The namesake card, the key card, the most important card in the deck is Splendid Reclamation. So a 4-mana green sorcery that mass reanimates all the lands in your graveyard. So we've never really seen a card like this before. There's been cards that, they reanimate all basic lands, or they reanimate all basic lands for everyone, not just you. Things like that, but we've never just seen an efficient card that gets all the lands, non-basic, basic, whatever, back from your graveyard to the battlefield. So the basic idea of this deck is we want to get a lot of lands in our graveyard, and then we cast a Splendid Reclamation, get them all back, and we win on the spot thanks to Valakut the Molten Pinnacle. So basically what we're trying to do is build Splendid Reclamation into this crazy burn spell that deals 18, 27, 36 damage with the help of one or more copies of Valakut. So Valakut the Molten Pinnacle, a land enters tapped whenever a mountain enters the battlefield under your control. If you have at least 5 other mountains, Valakut will lightning bolt something, 3 damage to a creature or player. So what we want to do is fill our graveyard with mountains, cast a Splendid Reclamation, and boom, we get 1,000,000 Valakut triggers and win the game. It's basically like a reverse Scapeshift combo. If you've seen Scapeshift, they try to sack all their lands, search their library for a bunch of mountains and some Valakuts, and kill the opponent with a huge amount of damage. Well, Splendid Reclamation works similarly, except we are getting the lands from our graveyard instead of from our library. So that's basically the idea of the deck, is we are trying to set up this combo. Splendid Reclamation is super important. It is, in fact, so important that we're playing 10 copies of Splendid Reclamation. So we got the 4 literal Splendid Reclamations. We also have 4 Bring to Lights, which is basically a 5-mana Splendid Reclamation. Our deck is playing a lot of colors of mana, and we'll talk more about the mana base as we go along, but we're playing a lot of colors of mana, so it's basically 5 mana, search our library for a Splendid Reclamation and cast it for free. So essentially just a Splendid Reclamation that costs 1 more mana. Eternal Witness takes advantage of the fact that we're dumping a ton of cards into our graveyard to set up the Splendid Reclamation, Reanimation, Valakut kill. So as we're dumping all these cards in our graveyard, we're probably going to dump some Splendid Reclamations or Bring to Lights, and we can use Eternal Witness to get them back and then cast the Splendid Reclamation to win the game that way. So as far as filling our graveyard, we got a bunch of different cards. These cards are very important to the deck as well. Pretty much on turn 2, on turn 3, and even on turn 4 in some cases, we want to resolve 2, 3, 4, as many of these cards as possible, because they stock our graveyard up with the lands that we need to win with the Splendid Reclamation. Grizzly Salvage, basically, we reveal 5 cards, we can take a creature or a land, put the rest into our graveyard. Mulch, 4 cards, we can take all the lands. Satyr Wayfinder, 4 cards, we can take a land. They're just 2-mana spells that let us do a little something. They replace themselves with something, usually a land, but in the case of Grizzly Salvage, it can get a Satyr Wayfinder or Eternal Witness, the only creatures in our deck. Plus, they dump stuff in our graveyard, and it's also important to realize with Grizzly Salvage, Satyr Wayfinder, when you cast them, you can just choose to dump everything in the graveyard, because sometimes we would rather have all the lands in the graveyard instead of putting one into our hand. For example, when we're going to be setting up the Splendid Reclamation kill, that turn, we're going on turn 6, Grizzly Salvage into Splendid Reclamation. We already have a land in our hand. We don't really want to take a land off Grizzly Salvage because you can only make one land drop a turn, so it's better to just mill all the lands and fail to find, essentially. So keep that in mind if you decide to play this deck. So these cards fill our graveyard, and then we have some things we can do from the graveyard. Life from the Loam is pretty important. We will, sooner or later, mill this with our Grizzly Salvages, our Mulches, and then every single turn we can just dredge 3, so mill 3 cards, skip a draw step, and then we get the Life from the Loam back from our hand. We can cast it to get back 3 lands if we need to. So it kind of works like a backup plan if something goes wrong, or opponent's Surgical Extraction, Splendid Reclamation. We can just go on the slow Valakut plan, make sure we hit all our land drops by dredging, getting the mountains back, hitting our opponent once a turn with a lightning bolt from Valakut by playing a mountain. But really, the main power of this card is we can use it as a repeatable mulch, essentially, or one of those cards. If we already have a Splendid Reclamation in hand, we can just skip our draw every turn because we already got the card that'll win us the game, and Life from the Loam is guaranteed mill 3 every single turn to stock those lands up into our graveyard. Lingering Souls is super key. A lot of modern decks can kill on turn 4. In our deck, the soonest we can realistically kill is turn 4. Turn 5 is probably more common, so we want to be able to buy an extra turn, essentially. So Lingering Souls, as we're casting Mulches and Grizzly Salvages, dredging with Life from the Loam, we're going to just mill those into the graveyard. Then for just 2 mana, we flash it back. We get 2/1/1 spirits. We can chump block for 1 turn. Hopefully that's enough to buy us the 1 extra turn we need to get enough lands in our graveyard that we resolve Splendid Reclamation and win the game with a ton of Valakut trigger. As far as the mana base, the unique thing here is every single land in our deck outside of Valakut is either a mountain to trigger our Valakuts, or it's a fetch land that can get a mountain. So we have a wide array of red shock lands, so some of each. We also have Cinderglades, another mountain. Pain-Free comes into play tapped a lot, though. And then also a couple of basic mountains in case we get hit by a Path to Exile or a Ghost Quarter. So we have a lot of ways to trigger our Valakut, and then Bloodstained Mire in Wooded Foothills, red fetch lands, kind of hold everything together. We do need at least 4 colors of mana, and really 5 colors of mana if we're going to cast Lingering Souls from our hand. As far as the sideboard, Dispels are to fight through counter magic, essentially, to resolve our Splendid Reclamation. Leyline of Sanctity is to keep us from getting torn apart by discard, which would be a big problem for our deck if we are just playing all these graveyard filling spells on turns 2 and turn 3. If our opponent can Thoughtseize or Duress and take our Splendid Reclamation, all of a sudden our deck just isn't doing anything, so Leyline protects from that. Abrupt Decay, basically removal for anything, but importantly, it deals with Rest in Peace, which would be a big problem. Graveyard removal is pretty annoying for our deck. We can win through it in some scenarios, but it slows down our deck significantly if we can't use our graveyard. So Abrupt Decay can kill a Delver of Secrets, can kill a Tarmogoyf, can also kill a Rest in Peace or a Relic of Progenitus. Then we have some Stony Silences for Affinity. We have a bit of removal, Path to Exile, and Damnation. And then just a single Timely Reinforcement, which is also mostly a Bring to Light target. So that is Splendid Valakut in Modern. And I don't know about this deck. I don't know how it's going to work. I'm super excited to play it because it looks pretty good on paper. I could see this working. It seems like it should be pretty consistent, winning on turn 4, turn 5, by turn 6 at the latest. The question's going to be twofold. Question 1 is, how much graveyard hate do we run into? Dredge is a real deck, a popular deck in Modern. People, because of that, are likely playing more graveyard hate. If we run into a bunch of decks that are playing Rest in Peace, Leyline of the Void, Relic of Progenitus, those cards are going to be really bad for us and make it really difficult to win. In those scenarios, we're basically trying to win the game with Lingering Souls tokens, and we don't even get full value because we can't flash it back, and maybe building up enough lands that we just naturally Valakut our opponent in Lightning Bolt mode, 1 mountain at a time each turn. So not very practical. So graveyard hate, concern number 1. Concern number 2 is like I was saying, we're a turn 4, turn 5 deck. Modern, a lot of decks are turn 3, turn 4 decks. Is Lingering Souls enough to keep us alive? Basically, we need to be able to stay alive by chumping with Lingering Souls and chumping with Satyr Wayfinders long enough to go off on turn 4, turn 5 for the win. So I think it's going to depend on the matchups. If we run into decks that are consistently killing us on turn 3, we're going to have problems, like Death Shadow Zoo, Affinity in some draws. On the other hand, if we can push the game out just one extra turn, I think we can win quite a few matches. So I'm going to say, let's go 1 in 3. About 33% of the time I say. So I think we can do well. I'm just worried about the aggressive matchups and worried about the sideboard hate. So we'll see how it goes. Regardless, I think it's going to be really sweet and really cool, and I'm excited to actually test this deck out. So anyway, that's been our Splendid Valakut deck tech. I hope you enjoy the gameplay videos, and I will talk to you soon.